Jack Elam utterly despised him. Now we know the reason why. Jack Elam's story began far from the glittering lights of Hollywood. Born William Scott Elam on November 13, 1920, in the rugged mining town of Miami, Arizona, he grew up in a world where toughness wasn't optional. It was survival. Even as a boy, he showed a gift for storytelling and a knack for performance, traits that would eventually carry him into show business. But life didn't hand him fame on a silver platter. Before he ever set foot in front of a camera, Elam served in the U.S. Navy during World War II, an experience that sharpened his discipline and gave him the kind of resilience Hollywood would one day demand. After the war, he studied at the University of Southern California, determined to carve out a future bigger than the small desert town he came from. And then came the feature that would define him: his unmistakable misaligned eye. For most people, it would have been a lifelong curse. For Jack Elam, it became his secret weapon. That lazy eye turned him into something unforgettable and impossible to ignore on screen. Instead of hiding it, he leaned into it. Hollywood didn't know it yet, but it had just found a character actor like no other. What began as an apparent disadvantage would soon open the door to one of the most unique careers in film history. And before long, Elam would transform from a kid in Arizona with a crooked eye into one of the most recognizable faces in westerns. When Jack Elam finally broke into Hollywood, it didn't take long for casting directors to realize what they had. That wandering eye, the grizzled face, the wiry frame. He looked like he'd been pulled straight out of the Wild West itself. Before long, he was everywhere. Over the course of 5 decades, Elam would rack up more than 200 roles across film and television, cementing himself as one of the hardest-working actors of his generation. The Western became his natural playground. Films like Once Upon a Time in the West, Support Your Local Sheriff, 1969, and The Night of the Grizzly, 1966, turned him into the archetypal bad guy audiences loved to hate. But what made Elam different was that he never played his villains as flat caricatures. There was always a glint of humor, a twitch of humanity, something lurking behind those crooked eyes that made you wonder what else he was hiding. Audiences couldn't get enough of him, and neither could directors. Elam had tapped into a magic that few character actors ever found. He could steal a scene with a single look, and yet he refused to be boxed in. While Hollywood saw him as the perfect outlaw, he wanted more. So he started slipping into comedies and even family-friendly roles, always surprising viewers who thought they had him figured out. That unpredictability became his calling card. One moment he was the ruthless gunslinger. The next, he was making people laugh with an offbeat line delivery. It was proof that Jack Elam wasn't just a type, he was a force. By the late 1950s and early 60s, Jack Elam wasn't just a movie villain, he was turning into a television regular. Week after week, audiences spotted him in some of the biggest shows of the era. Gunsmoke, Bonanza, The Twilight Zone, The Lone Ranger. Each appearance was a reminder that Elam didn't just fit the Western mold, he defined it. His crooked grin and unpredictable energy made even a brief role unforgettable. But Elam wasn't satisfied with just dropping in for a quick gunfight. In 1974, he landed something more unusual: the role of Zach Wheeler in The Texas Wheelers. Here, he wasn't the cold outlaw lurking in the shadows. He was a rough-edged father, suddenly reappearing in his children's lives after their mother's death. The show, though short-lived, paired Elam with young actors who would soon become stars, including Mark Hamill, yes, the future Luke Skywalker, and Gary Busey. The comedy drama allowed Elam to show a softer, more chaotic side that most viewers had never seen before. That risk-taking didn't stop there. Just a few years later, in 1979, Elam shocked fans again by suiting up as Frankenstein's monster in the sitcom Struck by Lightning. It was bizarre, it was short-lived, and it was nothing like the grizzled cowboys people had grown used to. But it proved one thing: Jack Elam wasn't afraid of reinvention. He had made himself a household name, not by sticking to one role, but by pushing boundaries every chance he got. If Westerns made Jack Elam a star, Comedy made him unforgettable. By the early 1980s, he'd already proven he could terrify audiences with a glare. But in the Cannonball Run, 1981, he turned that same crooked stare into comedy gold, playing Dr. Nicholas Van Helsing, a self-described crazed proctologist. Elam stole scenes from an all-star cast that included Burt Reynolds, Dom DeLuise, and Farrah Fawcett. It didn't matter that his role was small. The moment Elam appeared on screen, audiences couldn't look away. He leaned into his eccentricity, wide eyes darting, voice carrying that perfect mix of menace and absurdity. Fans and critics agreed, in a film packed with big names, it was Elam who created some of the most unforgettable moments. The character was such a hit that Elam reprised the role in Cannonball Run 2 just 3 years later. Once again, his unpredictable antics brought wild laughter to theaters. It was proof that Elam's talent wasn't limited to dusty Western towns. He could dominate even the zaniest of modern comedies. And this was no one-off. Throughout the 80s, Elam leaned further into comedy, taking on oddball roles that highlighted his timing and fearless approach to humor. He wasn't afraid to look ridiculous, and that was exactly what made him stand out. He'd gone from the snarling outlaw with a six-shooter to the unhinged comic relief who could crack up millions with a single glance. For decades, audiences knew Jack Elam as the outlaw, the menace, or the wild-eyed comic relief. But in 1986, during the filming of the Aurora Encounter, a strange little weird western that mixed cowboys with science fiction, Elam revealed a side of himself few had ever seen. On set, he met Mickey Hayes, an 11-year-old boy from Texas who suffered from progeria, a rare condition that causes rapid aging. By all accounts, Mickey's life was filled with challenges most adults couldn't imagine. Yet somehow, this tough, grizzled actor and the fragile young boy formed an extraordinary bond. Their friendship went beyond the set. Elam treated Mickey not as a sick child, but as a person, a friend who mattered. The connection was so powerful that it was later featured in the 1987 documentary, I Am Not a Freak. Watching it, people were stunned. The same man who spent his career glaring down heroes in gunfights was here, openly showing warmth, humor, and deep compassion. Elam himself admitted that Mickey touched him in a way no one else ever had. You know, he once said, "I've met a lot of people, but I've never met anybody that got next to me like Mickey." For a man often typecast as the villain, it was a revelation. Beneath the rough exterior was a heart bigger than anyone expected. This bond gave fans and colleagues a rare glimpse of the real Jack Elam, not just the actor, but the human being. For all of Jack Elam's humor and warmth off-screen, there was one Hollywood legend who could make his blood boil: Gary Cooper. To most of the world, Cooper was the very definition of an American hero. Tall, handsome, stoic, the strong but silent type who embodied everything the Western genre stood for. Audiences adored him, critics praised him, and the Academy crowned him with multiple awards. But Jack Elam wasn't fooled. In his eyes, Cooper was the most overrated actor Hollywood had ever produced. Elam never kept his feelings secret. In interviews, on sets, even in casual conversation, he'd bring up his disdain. "Gary Cooper never impressed me," he once said bluntly. "He was always just there." To Elam, Cooper wasn't a great actor. He was a man who coasted on looks and reputation. He'd watch scenes where character actors like himself poured their energy into making the moment come alive, while Cooper would mumble a few words in that low voice of his. Critics would call it natural and brilliant. Elam saw it for what he thought it was: laziness. "If you asked me who I thought was lazy," Elam once remarked, "I'd say Gary Cooper without blinking." He accused Cooper of skipping rehearsals, of never pushing himself, of being content to just collect a paycheck while others sweated to make a scene sparkle. That work ethic, or lack of it, was unforgivable to a man like Elam, who prided himself on being prepared, disciplined, and respectful of the craft. But it wasn't just about acting. Elam also disliked the way Cooper treated people. While many remembered Cooper as a gentleman, Jack saw another side. Maybe if you were a studio head or a pretty actress, he explained. He was polite. But if you were just some working character guy like me, he barely acknowledged you. For Elam, who made a point of treating everyone on set with respect, from stars to stagehands, Cooper's aloofness was nothing short of arrogance. Perhaps most infuriating of all was the way Hollywood worshipped him. Cooper won an Academy Award for High Noon, a performance Elam dismissed as lifeless. You could have put a cigar store Indian in that role, he scoffed, and gotten the same performance. To him, Cooper wasn't brilliance, he was wallpaper. He filled the space, but you only noticed him because critics told you to. For Jack Elam, Gary Cooper symbolized everything wrong with Hollywood, an industry that rewarded looks and image over grit and talent. And that was something Elam could never forgive. On the surface, Jack Elam's hatred of Gary Cooper might have sounded like nothing more than one actor taking a shot at another. But for Elam, it was about something much larger than personal dislike. His criticism of Cooper was tied to a lifelong frustration with the way Hollywood valued its stars and ignored the people who gave films their soul. Elam saw himself, and others like him, as the backbone of the industry. Character actors weren't glamorous, they weren't splashed across magazine covers, and they weren't the ones who got the big awards. But they were the ones who did the heavy lifting. They gave color to a story, filled the world of a film with personality, and carried scenes that might have fallen flat without their energy. And yet, time and time again, it was the polished leading men like Cooper, who walked away with all the glory. For Elam, this imbalance wasn't just unfair, it was insulting. He knew how hard character actors worked, how much time and craft went into making even a small role shine. Meanwhile, Cooper, in Elam's eyes, got praised for doing the bare minimum. Critics fawned over his understated style, but Elam saw it as simply not trying. To him, it was proof that Hollywood rewarded appearance over effort, myth over reality. This resentment wasn't unique to Elam. Many character actors of his generation felt overshadowed by the leading men whose faces sold tickets, even when the supporting cast delivered the performances that audiences remembered most. But Elam had the guts to say it out loud. Where others might have held their tongues out of fear of offending powerful studios or tarnishing their careers, Jack didn't care. He said what he thought, no matter how unpopular it made him. What made his words sting even more was the contrast between Elam's own work ethic and what he perceived in Cooper. Jack was the kind of actor who arrived early, stayed late, and rehearsed until he was satisfied. He respected his craft and respected the people around him. To see someone like Cooper hailed as a legend while, in Jack's view, giving half the effort was something he could never reconcile. In many ways, Elam's disdain for Cooper was symbolic. Cooper wasn't just one man. He represented the system itself, a Hollywood that too often celebrated image over substance. And for Jack Elam, a man who built his entire career on grit, versatility, and unshakable work ethic, that was a betrayal he could never forgive. Off-screen, Jack Elam lived a surprisingly steady life. He married twice, first to Jean Louise Hodgert, and later to Margaret Jennison, with whom he spent over 40 years until his death in 2003. He passed away at 82 from heart failure, far from the spotlight, leaving behind a reputation as one of Hollywood's most unforgettable character actors. Elam's legacy wasn't about being the leading man. It was about proving that the so-called supporting players often carried the real weight of a story. With his crooked eye, grizzled charm, and fearless honesty, Jack Elam turned what might have been a limitation into a signature. For some, he'll always be the villain. For others, the comic relief. But for everyone who watched him, Jack Elam was proof that originality, not perfection, is what makes a star endure.